Hello, and welcome to the Poetry by the Sea Spring Celebration. I am Anna Evans, one of the original advisory board members for the Poetry by the Sea conference, and I'm joining you from Hainesport, New Jersey. Over the next few hours, we will celebrate the life and vision of the conference founder and director, Kim Bridgford. We have much in store for you, and you will see many familiar faces from our community of former faculty members and participants, some appearing live and others in pre-recorded videos. When the advisory board began discussing this event, we realized we wanted it to do two things. It had to be a fitting tribute to Kim Bridgford, a unique and inspiring person whose untimely death in June 2020 left many of us shocked and grieving. And it also had to bring together our community as a reminder of the great joy we have shared at the conference itself over its 5-year span, in the expectation that we can continue Kim's legacy in years to come. For that reason, portions of this event should evoke memories of happy sessions in Dempsey or Founders Hall at the Conference Center on the Connecticut shoreline, listening to readings and the annual lecture, or gathering in Mitchell to take in a panel. Of course, our focus for this online event is Kim. So the readings are from Kim's many published books, and the panel discussion is an appreciation of Kim Bridgford's poetry. The lecture, given by Julie Kane, is entitled The Fluidity of Form. Finally, we will round off the evening with the Sonnet and Book Contest Awards. It was the fall of 2014 when Kim first came to me with the idea of putting together a poetry conference outside of academia, outlining her dreams of making it global, inclusive, and diverse. I confess, I experienced some anxiety over the next 6 months as to whether we could really make it happen, even as we worked tirelessly alongside the other original advisory board members, Tom Cable, Natalie Gerber, Kat Gilbert, Russell Goings, and Cherise Pollard, to make those dreams a reality. But if Kim had her doubts, she never let them show. In a sense, her absolute belief in what she wanted to accomplish willed into being that first conference in May 2015. Like many of the people you will hear from, I learned a lot from Kim. The current advisory board members, myself, Nicole Caruso Garcia, Russell Goings, and Linda Stern, have willed this event into being in the spirit of Kim Bridgford and with the support of all those who contributed their time to put it together. I thank everyone who is participating and also all of you in the audience for joining us. And now we will turn to our first speaker, Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, who will talk to us about Kim Bridgford.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, friends, fans, family, students, and colleagues of our beloved Kim Bridgford. My name is Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, and it is my distinct honor to introduce the woman who needs no introduction. For all of us have had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Kim. Even so, it is a delight to remember and give thanks for the many ways in which Kim has touched our lives. Many of you know Dr. Bridgford as a deeply devoted teacher and mentor. Kim taught English and creative writing at Fairfield University in Connecticut from 1989 to 2010. Over the years, I have met many of her former students, now turned writers, and been deeply impressed by their affection for her and their appreciation for her guidance and inspiration. In 2010, Kim moved to Philadelphia to join the faculty at Westchester University and to serve as director of the Westchester Poetry Center. Many of us got to know Kim in her capacity as director of the Westchester Poetry Conference. In the course of her 4 years as director, Kim revolutionized the conference, diversifying the faculty, the plenary speakers, the panel presentations, and the participants to include poets who had been previously underrepresented, especially people of color, women, and young people. Her vision was brilliant and bold. Kim created a space for poets and scholars who had previously participated only as observers inviting them to share their talents, assume leadership roles, and to thrive in this new culture of inclusivity. In 2014, Kim took her vision to a whole nother level, as the saying goes, striking out on her own and founding an entirely new conference, Poetry by the Sea. This conference has taken place annually before the COVID crisis from 2015 through 2019. Independent of any institutions, Kim created a conference that embodied her ideals of what a diverse and inclusive community of poets ought to look like. All lovers and practitioners of poetry were and are welcome at Poetry by the Sea. She found an idyllic spot for the yearly gathering at the Mercy Center in Madison, Connecticut, on the shores of Long Island Sound, and created a conference that enabled us participants to pursue our passion, hone our craft, celebrate community, and lift one another's hearts. I still don't know how Kim did this. As a professor who has directed conferences at my own institution, knowing how much labor goes into planning an event on this scale, how much funding is required, how much risk is involved, I would marvel that Kim did this every year, in addition to her so-called real job. She derived no financial benefit from the conference. It was purely a labor of love. And love it we did, and still do, thanks to Kim. In addition to teaching and directing conferences, Kim also contributed to the poetry community in her role as editor. While at Fairfield, she served as editor of Dogwood, a journal of poetry and prose. Later, she founded and served as editor-in-chief of Mezzo-Cammin. The mission of the new journal was to provide a space for the work of practicing women poets. And as part of the project of showcasing women's work, she founded the Mezzo-Cammin Women Poets Timeline Project, a tremendously ambitious undertaking which she designed to become the world's largest database of women poets. I'm thrilled to have written 5 essays for the project, and if you haven't yet had the opportunity to write for the project or to explore the database, treat yourself and do. Finally, last but by no means least, while Kim was pursuing all of these worthy projects, she also managed to keep her rich, imaginative life going. A prolific poet, Kim published 13 books of poems, each of them rich, accomplished, and wonderfully varied in terms of their subject matter, ranging from Alfred Hitchcock to fortune cookies, bullies and blow-up dolls to religious epiphanies. Among these titles is Instead of Maps, a collection which was nominated for the Poets Prize, and In the Extreme, Sonnets About World Records, which won the Donald Justice Poetry Prize. Kim was a formalist poet. She mastered multiple forms, wrote powerful, taut, finely crafted pieces, and yet her ease with these forms always allows for the element of the unexpected, which plays nicely against formal constriction. Her poems are full of wit and humor, and also full of pathos. 2 years ago, I was honored to endorse Kim's last and one of her finest books, A Crown for Ted and Sylvia. I was deeply moved by the collection. Formally elegant, classically severe, Kim's poems move by suggestion and indirection, implying much more than can be said, not just about the 2 lost souls of Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, but also about our own lives. There is a sibylline quality to the book. The repeating forms, Kim favors, haunting villanelles, playful pantinas, and of course, the regal crown, function like charms, strange enchantments, hinting at mysteries that cannot be unraveled. One of my favorite poems in the collection is Buying Sylvia Plath's Typewriter. I'd like to close by reading that poem, but before I do, I wanted to share just one last delightful memory of Kim. As many of us are aware, and like many of us, Kim had a particular fascination with Sylvia Plath. The gifts of that brilliant poet who was lost to us still burn so brightly, even these many years after her death. In 2013, during her tenure as director of the Westchester Poetry Center, Kim hosted a birthday party for Sylvia to honor her legacy 50 years after her passing. A number of us Plath devotees gathered at Poets House on the Westchester campus on a beautiful October day to read Plath's work and talk about her influence in our lives and in our poems. It was a genial, collegial celebration. There was cake and wine and so much goodwill in that room. I saw old friends there and met some wonderful poets and artists who became new friends. Kim had a gift for bringing people together. That day, she provided a space for us all to tell Plath's story and also to tell our own. The generosity of the gesture was typical of Kim. We were all brought together in our mutual admiration for this poet we simultaneously celebrated and mourned. It strikes me that this is exactly what we are doing today, only instead of Sylvia, we are gathering to celebrate and mourn Kim. Kim, who sought to set the world on fire through her teaching, through her conferences, through her editing, through her poetry, and set it on fire she did. Buying Sylvia Plath's typewriter. I want the words to burn. So too the ribbon, like a silken extension, or like betrayal's braid. Words have a power, although not quite as often as we hope, to throw the underworld some shade. They thought of themselves as gods, the best gods going, but gods that could type and would, and saw themselves as makers of a special brand of knowing. They'd placed themselves with spirit. Who resolved to live in a rural landscape? These two. The keys today are quaint with fire. The time has passed where people think relationships can last. I'm an optimist by nature, hurt by lies. The more I use this typewriter, I will learn, through simple practice, how the world can burn. Thank you.
But I think it's the hope of a poet. I think that poets do like to feel that what they're doing matters and that they can change the course of people's daily intimacies or people's daily lives and say something that might make it possible for the world to be somewhat new. In a much earlier life, I was a stand-up comic. And so, yes, I was. And so that's another sort of thing where you're doing, and you do your performance and you like to hope that the audience is with you, but in a funny way. But whatever your performance is, you like to think that it matters what you've done.
Hi, my name is Kelly Higgins. I live in LaGrange, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and I'm Kim's sister. I can't speak as much about her poetry world as much as I can speak about Kim as a person and as a sister. She was one of the good ones. I can only remember twice in 53 years that she was upset with me. Once when I kept pulling all the books out of her bookcases as a kid. She had all her books alphabetized by last name of author at age 10. And so I somehow instinctively knew that this would get her attention, and it did. The other time was when she was in high school and I marked on one of her typewritten papers, and she had to retype the whole thing because she was a perfectionist. but that was it. We never argued. We were never upset with each other. We got along fabulously. She was a wonderful role model, a great big sister. She was hardworking and funny with a great sense of fairness. She was always kind and inclusive, and she really struggled to understand when people weren't. She didn't understand mean people, and it really, really bothered her when people were unkind. It does not surprise me that when she started Poetry by the Sea, that she wanted to include everyone and make everyone feel like they had a home there, because it's who she was. I missed her. I miss her all the time. We talked or texted a lot. She would call probably once a week at least and say, Kel, Kim. And I still have it on some messages that I listen to every once in a while. I miss everything about her, and I know she lives on in work and in our hearts. She will always be a part of me. And I know she would be honored that people thought so highly of her. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Bridgford Waldron. I'm Kim's youngest sister. I live in Adel, Iowa. I just wanted to say that all my years growing up, when I was young, I remember Kim typing at her manual typewriter all the time. And I remember how excited she was when she got an electric typewriter. It was a huge thing at our house. She was one that read to me when I was young all the time. And she was just my best friend, beside my sister. And when I got older, she did so many things. She became a poet like we always knew she would. Never a doubt in my mind growing up. Always knew that that was what Kim was meant to be. And I know that Poetry by the Sea means the world to her. And I remember when someone said, oh, you can't get all of that together and pull that off. And that's all Kim had to hear. No, just wasn't in her vocabulary. So she got right on it and she put it together, and she was so proud that it all fell into place. So I am so glad that Poetry by the Sea is continuing. I know that she would be so happy that everyone was able to get together and do their poetry and do their readings. And we miss her tons. This June will be a year, and I still can't believe it. It just took us all by surprise. So we just appreciate all the love and support that everyone has given to us and to her son Nick. And it's beautiful to see that there were so many people out there that loved her and cherished her as much as we did. So I appreciate all of that, because I never knew what an impact she had on so many people. So thank you for putting that out there. We all knew she was amazing, and we knew that she was such a good listener, friend, teacher, mother, sister, and confidant. So thank you so much. Wish you all luck, and please keep doing what you're doing and keep this thing going.
Carpe diem, Dr. Bridgford's voicemail rang out at Fairfield University, a reminder to seize the day. And there are many days after class hours that I would dial that number just to hear her authentic and lovely voice remind me that I had the power and the aptitude to do just that. To be present in the moment, to breathe through the moment, to make it to the next moment, to seize the day. And I cherish the many days and moments that I was able to learn under the tutelage of Dr. Bridgford. And I cherish the many days and moments that I was able to spend loving and being loved by Dr. Bridgford. And I cherish the many days and moments that I was able to gather and give flowers to Dr. Bridgford while she was with us. I first met Dr. Bridgford as a wounded teenager my junior year in high school. And in fact, she was the reason that I decided to choose Fairfield University as my undergraduate alma mater. I just had to learn from this brilliant mind. I just had to be inspired by this powerful person. I simply had to be inspired by her powerful poetry. And so I chose that university. And for 5 years, I studied under the tutelage of Dr. B. Through all of the trials and triumphs of life, she never forgot, even after those 5 years. She remained a constant in my life. Fast forward to 2015, and I have relocated to Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am teaching and raising my family. And I get a call from Dr. Bridgford, and she says, I'll be in Charlotte and we have to have dinner. And I've got someone I want you to meet. Enter Russell L. Goings, another pivotal pioneer in my life. And I just think of the fact that all of the connections, all of the learning, all of the gifting that Dr. Bridgford did, sowing seeds in my life and the lives of so many others, it is no doubt that she is so greatly loved and so greatly cherished by so many. Dr. B, I know you are with us. So rise in poetry and rest well. I will always cherish you. You have greatly impacted my life, and your legacy lives on.
I'm Joshua Mehigan, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York. When Kim died, my social media feed, and yours too probably, were completely awash in grief and also gratitude for her, from her family and friends, her colleagues, her students, and so on, fellow poets. I think that social media has made death in some ways more painful and alienating than ever. But I was struck by the character of the messages left to mourn and celebrate Kim's life, which were full of devotion. You could feel it in all of them, the palpable effect of Kim's influence, her friendship, and her being in the world. In the 16 years that I knew Kim, I, of course, learned pretty quickly that she was a well-loved and accomplished person, and that she was also a deeply principled person with the kind of values a lot of poets advert to daily, but that Kim was on a mission to spread wherever she went and to turn into reality. Kim lived and also transmitted her ideals. She was generous about it, and she was extremely intrepid about it. And she transmitted them into her various public roles, poet, professor, of course, editor, founder of Mezzo Cammin, conference director, and as founder of Poetry by the Sea, Kim did something I don't think anyone else in the world of poetry has. There could have been lots of people talking about doing it, but in my 30 years spent in the professedly upright world of American poetry, I know of nobody who explicitly and with such force of character and demonstrable success also went about creating a conference that was so broadly inclusive in a yearly event where a true diversity of poets could congregate and exchange ideas and simply talk about poetry. I knew all this, of course, but it's, I guess, tragically easy to take people you know for granted. When Kim died and when I saw the response, it really did force me to stop and to just sit there for a little while, simply feeling the reach of Kim's life. I met Kim when I was 34 by email. I had just been evicted. I was living in an 80 square foot room. I had an awful job. I had little to show for a decade plus of work as a poet. And then I got this email from Kim in February 2004, the end of February, telling me I'd won the Dogwood Prize. And I can't tell you how important it was to me, and giving me a reason to think anybody might consider my writing more than merely a quaint hobby. And for 2 decades after that, Kim continued to show a tremendous amount of generosity to me, kept giving me hope and opportunity, and sometimes also really necessary support as a writer. Readings, including my first university reading was at Fairfield. Teaching gigs at Westchester and Poetry by the Sea, and many other such things. And for Kim's continual and exceedingly generous support, and for all her efforts to confer legitimacy on so many poets, I will always be hugely grateful. Thank you, Kim.
Hello, I'm Marilyn Taylor, former Poet Laureate of Wisconsin, speaking to you from Madison, Wisconsin today. My dear friend Kim, I'm pretending this is a letter because it seems to be much easier to talk to you that way than from a piece of paper or a written document. And first of all, I want to say how deeply loved you were by so many, including everybody involved with Poetry by the Sea, of course, and with all the other conferences and poetry gatherings that you were such often a major part of. Second, I want to tell you that my heart goes out to your family and your closest friends and the far-flung circle of people you interacted with. The impression you left on all of us was indelible, and you were always so imperturbable. I don't know how you did it, but you were, and I envy you for that. But now you're gone, and we're grieving. Many of us are poets ourselves, looking for solace in the words and sentences that always helped us out before. But it's not working for me right now. I can't find those words that worked in the past, because Kim, you were one of us. This was not supposed to happen. How do we replace the supportiveness you brought with you wherever you went, no matter whom you were dealing with? Supportiveness for me personally, for other women poets, both of the past and of the present, for male poets too, of course, and maybe especially for poets of color. Overall, I wish I'd known you better and had a whole list of anecdotes to share, but the only one I can think of was the time that you and I found ourselves in Crested Butte, Colorado, at a writers' conference there. And while the rest of the poets and writers that we were with decided to go on a virtuous hike in the mountains, you and I thought it would be best to go shopping. Shopping for socks, actually. Which is shameful in a way, but in a way, I'm glad I did it, because here's what came out of it. My Kim socks. And I still treasure them, and I still wear them. I know that others have much better and much more moving stories to tell, so I'd better close. And I'll close with a wish from Lucille Clifton. And it could have been, I think it probably was, your wish as well, Kim. All that I'm asking is that you see me as something more than a common occurrence, more than a woman in her ordinary skin. We do, Kim, we do.
Hi, this is Clare Rossini, and I'm coming to you from West Hartford, Connecticut on a beautiful spring afternoon. I'm here to talk about our dear friend, the wonderful poet, Kim Bridgford. I met Kim at the Writers' Workshop in Iowa many years ago. She was a year behind me, and we happened to take Donald Justice's forms class together. And I remember one day Don asked Kim to stand in front of the class and read her poem, which was a villanelle, and as you can imagine, it was exquisite. And I didn't know Kim, but I was really struck by her presence. She had a black beret on. She was dressed all in black and had these red plush lips, red lipstick. And she just recited her poem with such poise and authority. And of course, it was chillingly beautiful. So fast forward many years, my husband and I moved to Connecticut, and Kim's son was about the age of our son, and she got in touch with me. I was teaching at Trinity, she was at Fairfield, and our families got together many times. So after she left Connecticut for Westchester, we stayed in touch. And then when she founded the amazing Marvel Poetry by the Sea, she asked me to be on the faculty, and I happily joined Poetry by the Sea, taught there, I think, for 3 or 4 years. And one of my most vivid memories of Kim at the conference was how she moved through those days and rooms. It seemed she was everywhere, kind of both the needle and the thread of the conference, knitting us all together, speaking graciously and generously to the undergrads, as well as the participants, as well as the many really important poets that she brought to the conference as guests. She just had this gift for creating community, and her plans were big. I loved that about Kim. She was always thinking big. I loved that this was an international conference bringing people from all over, not just the country, but the world together to think and talk poems. So I hope somehow that vision can continue. And meanwhile, I think of her often and so grateful for all she has given me as a friend and all of us as participants in that amazing conference. And of course, what she has given the world of poetry in her amazing poems. Thank you, Kim.
It's hard for me to talk about Kim. I knew her for probably 15 years, and I never felt that I knew her well enough. But she always dazzled me with her generosity and her energy, which she used to not only include people, but to empower them. And she certainly empowered me over and over by inviting me to read poetry, to give toasts, to be a host at poetry readings, to be a board member, first at Westchester and then at Poetry by the Sea, to organize donations for scholarships, which I did. So many things, including publishing my work in Mezzo Cammin, and introducing me to Russell Goings very early on, and so many people through him, and so many people through her poetry conferences. So I would like to read a poem of hers that means a great deal to me. It's from her collection of Chinese fortune cookie poems, is how I think of them. It's called The Seed. And the fortune says, every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. The seed. At first, we turn our backs on this small seed and wonder how we'll take another breath. It's hard to find the goodness in a death. We stand in lines of black and sob our need. Where is the place that opens up to us? The heaven stares to the miraculous and makes us happy in our waves of gloom. Where in our seedlessness is room for one that brings us happiness to measure to match our loss, equal or greater treasure. The dirt we rub between our fingers will be indiscriminate in what to pull a life from. Worm, a bit of tree, a flower. We have to be as open to life's power. And I look forward to seeing what Kim will continue to empower.
Hello, I'm Anna Evans, coming to you from Hainesport, New Jersey, and I'm going to read the tribute written by Kim's son, Nicki Duval. My mother, Kim Bridgford, was an extraordinary person who only wanted the best for herself and for everyone around her. She wouldn't settle for anything less, and she made beautiful, amazing things happen. She made an indelible impact on her family, students, fellow poets, and the world around her. She fought hard as a woman poet entrepreneur, and the legacies of her amazing poetry and her passion projects of mezzo cammin and poetry by the sea will live on for years and years to come. I learned from her every day that I was lucky to spend with her. She instilled in me her most treasured values: kindness, warmth, hard work, ambition, empathy. She always pushed me to be the strongest student I could be, because I know she wanted me to have as many opportunities as I could. She was always supportive of the projects I took on as a budding concert promoter and musician, coming to my shows even though her favorite music was always country. She opened up a world of books to me, teaching me how to read and always asking me if I'd read a certain author or poet. It will live on in the archives that she was a voracious reader who, as a child, read hundreds of books in a summer for a competition in her hometown of Coal Valley, Illinois. We also shared experiences around cinema, watching films nightly at home or at the theatre, going to film festivals, talking about Alfred Hitchcock and Billy Wilder while she was writing her book on them, and always rejoicing in our fandom of Hayao Miyazaki. She loved her slippers with characters from his films on them. She always tried to include me on trips that she went on. My favourites were trips to Reykjavik, Dublin, Galway, London, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and the place where we scattered some of her ashes, Essex, New York, near Lake Champlain. She made me feel welcome all of those times, and it was always wonderful to be in unfamiliar places with her. These are only some of the lovely memories I have of her. I can't emphasize enough how much I miss her. In every facet of my life, at every moment when I wonder what she would think of a book or a movie or a cultural event, at every crucial juncture where I would have asked for her support and advice, she gave me hope, stability, peace, and so much more that I can't even begin to articulate. Her early death to such a horrible illness fills me with an often unbearable sadness. But her love, her teachings, and her desire for a beautiful world inspire me to strive for only the best. That is what she would have wanted. Hello and welcome back. One of the aspects of Kim's role as director that she relished the most was the opportunity to connect poets to readers and listeners. She loved every facet of this, whether it was the coup of getting former poet laureate Rita Dove to be keynote speaker, or the ability to introduce rising young stars like Mahogany Browne and Richie Hoffman to a wider audience. I remember how thrilling it was for me when she invited me to be a part of the conference faculty readings for the first time after my book, Under Dark Waters: Surviving the Titanic, was published in 2018. She was a mentor to so many and delighted in being able to offer exposure, especially to women poets and poets of color. And yet, Kim never used the conference as an opportunity to promote her own work, prolific though she was. Her books were on sale in the bookstore, of course. And as an aside, how she loved that bookstore and reveled in the sales figures, rejoicing when a featured reader sold out of copies after a particularly well-received reading. But Kim never gave a faculty reading at the conference or put herself on the new books panel, even though she published Human Interest in 2016 and A Crown for Ted and Sylvia in 2019. This event gives us a chance to turn the spotlight around and shine it on Kim's own impressive and extensive oeuvre. For this next segment, we invited 9 poets to choose their favorite poems from Kim's 10 collections and video themselves reading. The poems are offered to you in the order in which they were published as a way of indicating the span of Kim's work. This way, you can hear Kim's words magnified by the voices of others, the same way she magnified the voices of so many poets by presenting them at the conference. I hope you enjoy the following video.
Hello, I'm Maryann Corbett, speaking to you from St. Paul, Minnesota. I've chosen a poem from Kim Bridgford's very first book, Undone. The poem is called The Boy Who Cried Wolf. How can he tell them that he sees wolf shapes, even in their eyes? Each time he starts to speak, he watches what happens in the gaps, the tightening at the mouth, the eye slits of disappointment. They have had enough. But if they saw the swirling secrets of that fur, the pack like horror underneath, wouldn't they speak too? He has no love of this life, only faith that when they come for him one day, someone will save his name, telling of a boy who knew the terrors of life so well he saw no other thing, and so could only bleat to death his warning of a wolf. Meanwhile, they pointed out his errors.
Hi there. My name is Sally, and today I'm going to be reading a poem by Kim Bridgford called Robert Frost. I chose this poem because on the very day that I was asked to read a poem, I had been reading a little bit about Robert Frost, and also because in Kim's collection, instead of maps, she has a wonderful series of poems on different poets, and also she includes one on Frank Lloyd Wright in that, which is just lovely. But I'm always just so drawn to this little series of poems because of their detail and their insight into each poet and artist. They're mostly sonnets, and then she has a lovely poem, a lovely villanelle for Sylvia Plath. But today I'm going to be reading Robert Frost. Robert Frost. You seemed to know the most about the dark, but softened it, so we would listen still as leaves before they show they're vulnerable to wind. You seemed to know the grief of work and also joy, depending on the weather and how the critics saw your poems. You seemed to know how tragedy could happen, aimed at no one, but simple as a signature. You seemed to be the voice that spoke the poems, genial, meandering, New England to the core. And yet you never were. You played the part. The mask you wore enabled the extremes, the truth that fingers ice and whispers fire. It was the neighbor's voice that made it art. Thank you, Kim.
Hi, I'm Melissa Balmain in Rochester, New York. It's my honor to share a poem from Kim's sonnet collection, In the Extreme. These are all poems inspired by world records. It's a delightful collection, and I chose this particular poem because it exemplifies a number of things I admired so much about Kim. Her intelligence, her focus, her faith, and above all, her boundless courage. The greatest egg-dropping height. This is a metaphor for how to live. To drop an egg from 700 feet by helicopter and to still believe the egg will land unbroken from that height. Why not, we want to say, believe in this? We've heard of miracles not quite so strange. And when the fragile is its own antithesis, we feel that we are peering through the hinge between what's real and not, or otherly. If eggs can fall like that, then there is luck. If eggs can fall like that, then so can we. Or we die differently than we had thought. Or somehow when we land, we're also caught. We want what's true and false in the same yoke.
Hi, my name is Michael, and I'm joining everybody from the Bronx. I'm going to read the poem Later by Kim Bridgford from her book Bully Pulpit. What touched me the most about this poem in particular is how it deconstructed the myth of Leda and the Swan that we're all so familiar with from Yeats and the mythology in general, but completely doesn't just reimagine the myth or reclaim it, but destroys it entirely and reclaims the humanity, what Kim calls the human, for the character of Leda, and transforms her from a figure, from some symbol, into a human being, something that is always required as we interrogate the poems and myths of old. And here's the poem, Leda. I'm tired of all the games, the giant swan, the other transformations you tried on. With every thought equated to an action, you didn't blame yourself. Just like the sheen of fear tied up in rope and stiff with blood. You liked the way you shamed and sullied good. But listen to me now. I'm done. I'm human. Sick of all the things gods do to women. Your narcissism clear, your shifting weathers, the sudden suffocation by your feathers. I'm cleaning myself off to find the moral. See yourself for what you are, a debacle on a cloud. On earth, we find it different, Zeus. Look, all the ropes you tied me with are loose. Thank you.
My name is Anton Yakovlev, joining from Ridgewood, New Jersey, and I'm going to read the poem For the Female Suicides by Kim Bridgford that appears in her book Doll. And I've chosen this poem because of how universal it is, and having known several people who have struggled with suicidal ideation, I was really struck by it when I first read it. I think the poem is both an elegy and a warning to those who are alive and maybe entertaining these ideas, and an encouragement to choose a different path. For the female suicides after Donald Justice. You thought it would be different from then on. The others, every day, would think of you. Yet loved ones felt betrayed, and they went on. They didn't weigh the heft of each flat stone or feel the murky brilliance of the blue. You thought it would be different from then on. You thought they'd understand your deep impression. You thought they needed proof to make it true. Yet loved ones felt betrayed, and they went on. What happened in the oven of depression was that you eked away. I see it too. You thought it would be different from then on. And so it was, as well, for your friend Anne. Your taxi driver, Death, charged up your ego, yet loved ones felt betrayed, and they went on. When you leave people, there's a realization they're less important than your need to go. You thought it would be different from then on, yet loved ones felt betrayed, and they went on. Kim Bridgford, rest in peace.
I'm Carolyn Raphael, Poetry Coordinator of the Village of Great Neck Plaza in Great Neck, New York. I am honored to read a poem by Kim Bridgford as we celebrate her today. As a retired college English professor, I share Kim's lament in her fine poem, Gone Are the Libraries, from her book, Human Interest. Gone are the libraries. Gone are the libraries, the card catalogs, the homework that used to be eaten by dogs. Gone are the libraries. Gone are the magazines that very few read, but poets all yearned for to be garlanded. Gone are the magazines. Gone are the phone lines in dormitory halls where love twists its signal and crying appalls. Gone are the phone lines. Gone are the letters sent home from the war, calligraphied thank yous, the airmail that tore. Gone are the letters. Gone are the typewriters that pecked at their truth, but so is Joe DiMaggio and so is Babe Ruth. Gone are the typewriters. Gone are the newspapers, gone are the shops where real food was sold by old moms and pops. Gone are the newspapers. Instead there is speed, and instead there is hype, and instead of live interviews, we set up our Skype. Instead there is speed. We find all this loss when we're waiting or walking. Nobody's thinking, and everyone's talking. We find all this loss. What have we done? Now we press and delete. We sleep with our phones, and we text, and we tweet. What have we done? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Matt W. Miller. I'm checking in from Exeter, New Hampshire. I'm going to read the poem The Oven by Kim Bridgford. Sylvia Plath, who the poem is for, was the poet that made me want to become a poet. And Kim was a poet who sustained me as a poet. So here we go. The Oven for Sylvia Plath. The pedestrian nature of your death bothered me because it was a stage. The two creamy children in bed, the rugs under the door, the note left as instructions. Afterwards, it was just grimy, the way houses are when you move out, the texture, nostalgia. Most of the time, people hide their sadness in cupboards, in boxes, in a pink diary with a key. It was unfair that you were cheated on, that you did all that work for the ledgers of heaven, and no one gave you credit. You were just young enough not to know that your story was typical, that sending all those manuscripts out for someone else was part of life, how your jealousy flared like a neon gas the Houdini act of the betrayed. How you got out. Like a woman cut in half, like a cage lowered underneath the heavy blue waves of the ocean. Then, who can believe it? There you are, a cartoon hurricane, black and white, howling your judgmental mouth like Sunday school meets, Nazi meets, Athena holding a thunderbolt, foggy, amorphous, and adolescent blowfish. You can't do this to me. No, no, no. All these years later, your son has died by hanging, and your husband is dead too. I would like to make something else for you besides death and the dawn. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Debra Bruce, reading from my home in Chicago. I'm reading from a crown of sonnets that Kim had published in the Valparaiso Review in 2019. I'm reading the first two of those sonnets. And the reason I chose this sequence is I found it really beautiful, but also just very moving emotionally. Unlike a lot of Kim's work, very autobiographical, very vulnerable, and at the same time, it has in it all the reserve and the tongue-in-cheek humor that I like in her work. A crown for the divorcee at 59. You never thought the absence would be you, the time like socks or tasks done in a row. Of course, it's not all like that. There's more quiet, and there's more time to have the camembert, the movies at the Ritz, the meal at Park, the discount markers for the coming dark. The ironies the setting is for one. The passing shock is just multiplication, like chalk pastels reverberating. But other times it's sad, like grief, or the waiting people do when someone's passing. Writing might be the best approach, or more reading. The Swedish language sitting there for you. You never thought you'd look for more to do. You never thought you'd look for more to do, yet that is where you are. The narrative on Facebook is a cliche. The parted wave against her skin. The style you used to know reminded you he'd given love away. We all have things we do and don't abide, and yours was love, like silk or leopard tried. But only love that's honest, not the lie. It was imaginary, this whole thing. Not that it didn't happen, as it did. It just was all played out, a redone story you couldn't quite believe, like the Louise Penny you were figuring out. And it was unexpected. That's why they say the story needs revising.
This is Annie Finch in Portugal, and I'm delighted to be sharing Kim Bridgford's poem, Lazarus. This is one of my very favorite poems of Kim's. In fact, it is my favorite poem of Kim's. I think it is just a perfect villanelle. I find it so moving, and the subject matter, of course, is so relevant to Kim's death and to Kim's rebirth in all of us and in all of the work that she did that continues to share with us constantly. And I also think it's a magnificent villanelle, the way the repeating lines are different in meaning every time. And I feel that Kim is a very strong religious poet, and that this poem really exemplifies the power of her deep faith and her imagination, and the way that her faith and imagination interweave. Lazarus by Kim Bridgford. Fishers of men. Because you found me somewhere in between, because you realized the truth of that, you pulled me up. The not seen was now seen, like something that's half buried, serpentine, a vine the wind has covered, dust unset, because you pulled me up. Somewhere in between, the insects covered me in celebration, and God began to pull from where he sat. You pulled me too. The not seen was now seen, the end result a cause of God's confusion. And God began to pull from where he sat, because who else could do a thing like that? Because you found me somewhere in between, God stepped aside for you, and it was done. And so the grave closed, and your welcome mat. Pull me up, the not seen was now seen. Who would have thought? The sun in imitation and I come stumbling out into the sunlight. Because you found me somewhere in between, you pulled me up like roots, as was foreseen.
Welcome to the panel discussion portion of the Poetry by the Sea celebration honoring Kim Bridgford, the founder and director of the Poetry by the Sea Conference. I'm Linda Stern, a Poetry by the Sea advisory board member. Kim lives on in the hearts of those who loved her, as well as in all that she accomplished for the poetry community, from teaching and mentoring to publishing Mezzo Cammin and establishing the Women Poets Timeline Project, to sponsoring readings, to founding the conference. But she also lives on in her work, her own poetry, which we've heard so eloquently read just now. So as part of this spring celebration in honor of Kim Bridgford, we wanted to take a deeper look at Kim's poetic legacy. We've asked 4 poets who admired Kim and know her work well to come together for a panel discussion entitled An Appreciation of Kim Bridgford's Poetry. Moderating the discussion is David M. Katz. David is the author of 4 books of poetry and the David M. Katz Poetry Blog. David and I are speaking from Manhattan. The other panelists are the poets Allison Joseph, professor of English and director of the MFA program in creative writing at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale; Wendy Sloan, a co-host of the Carmine Street Metrics reading series in New York City; and Joyce Wilson, Joyce Wilson, editor of the online journal The Poetry Porch, joining us from Scituate, Massachusetts. David, Allison, Wendy, and Joyce appeared frequently as panelists, workshop leaders, readers, and participants at Poetry by the Sea conferences. Their brief bios appear on our website, poetrybytheseaconference.org. It's my pleasure to turn the proceedings over to David Katz. David.
Thanks, Linda. It's an honor to be celebrating the poetry of Kim Bridgford today. In the ruthlessly competitive, gossipy, and even nasty tempest in a teapot that the poetry world can be, Kim stood out for her kindness and the ability to bring people together. This is how I came to know and admire Kim, as the leader of the Westchester Poetry Conference and at her brilliant brainchild, Poetry by the Sea. Although I knew she was a poet, her tendency to put others before herself made her work something of a mystery to me and perhaps to others. We hope, by revealing aspects of her work from 4 different angles today, we can bring some highly deserved attention to her poetry. It's a delight to be here with my friends, the poets Allison Joseph, who will talk about Kim as a connector between minority and majority poetry communities through music and art; Wendy Sloan, who will focus on Kim's interest in social justice; and Joyce Wilson, who will reveal the spiritual side of some of Kim's finest work. I'll begin with an analysis of A Crown for the Divorcee at 59, which Debra Bruce read from beautifully earlier in the program. I consider this sonnet crown to be the summit of Kim's poetic career. And I'll begin. Divorce is the sign of knowledge in our time, William Carlos Williams writes in Patterson, exclaiming, "Divorce, divorce." These oddly exultant lines suggest the excitement of discovery a divorced spouse may suddenly find herself seized with, a strange new sense of being the liberated half of a prior whole. Painful, even tragic, though many divorces are, They can offer each of the parties the time and elbow room to unearth long, dormant, or new truths about themselves, or even, perhaps, to beget an entirely new self. For the subject of A Crown for the Divorcee at 59, Kim's late masterpiece, however, the initial effect of divorce seems to be self-cancellation. You never thought the absence would be you, the sequence starts. On the surface, the line may merely mean that the divorcee hadn't even thought she'd be divorced. Darker, though, is another possible meaning. As a result of the breakup, she herself has become a ghostly absence. Her real life, her living self, may be elsewhere, suspended in the past, in her now non-existent marriage, perhaps. Yet over the course of the intricate repetitions required by the form Bridgford shows, the divorcee assesses her current situation and by the end arrives at a possible source of hope. The poet had already composed many crowns, becoming a master of these sequences of 7 sonnets interwoven with repeating first and last lines. The form enabled Bridgford to go back and forth from sonnet to echoing sonnet, accreting meaning as she went along. But the word crown carries other meanings too. One is sadly comical. Despite her lengthy toil as a wife, the speaker in the poem has been crowned with the dubious distinction of being a 59-year-old divorced woman. Another is a possible autobiographical meaning for Bridgford, who died at the age of 60 on June 28, 2020. Apparently written near the end of her life, this piece can, and I think should be seen as her crowning poetic achievement. Published in the Valparaiso Poetry Review about a year before she died, the poem represents the culmination and summit of a career comprising 13 books of verse, most of them published in the final 2 decades of her life. Restless, sometimes whimsical in her choice of subjects, Bridgford wrote books centering on themes as idiosyncratic as fortune cookies, Hitchcock films, and world records. Most of her poems were sonnets, and she produced a passionate and visionary book of them called Epiphanies, and one called A Crown for Ted and Sylvia, i.e. Hughes and Plath, which came out in 2019. Along the way in these books, scattered double dactyls and limericks pop up. On many levels, however, A Crown for the Divorcee at 59 marks a sharp departure for Kim. For one thing, it's written in a confessional style largely unprecedented in her poetry and seemingly at odds with the restraint she exhibited in her other work. True, a fascination with the life of Sylvia Plath inspired many of Kim's poems. Yet her approach to Plath was not one of identifying with the famously self-destructive poet or imitating her style, but of investigating the mysteries surrounding her suicide. In A Crown for the Divorcee at 59, however, Bridgford reveals a sustained interest in the psyche that she had rarely shown before, and it seemed to carry news about Kim's life. Seemed, though, is the operative word here, and we should hesitate to read this poem in a narrowly autobiographical way. The speaker in the poem addresses a you that is not quite the poet. Suffice it to say that the poem dramatizes with great sensitivity and an impressive depth, a sensibility experiencing a specific set of circumstances that may resemble that of its author. I think it's more productive to see Bridgford through the character of the divorcee attempting to embrace the beloved buried part of a poet's self that Wallace Stevens referred to as an interior paramour, the inner self of the poet as artist. Unlike anything else she had done, Bridgford was here devoting sustained attention to the way the inner self can divide like a cell into, quote, all your previous selves, end quote, as the divorcee says, pondering what her future might be. Her old identity, the character thinks, could be redone in vintage. Envisioning a different life, she imagines herself decked out in sparkly sneakers and Chanel, a wry patchwork of the new and the old. Another related leap forward that Bridgford makes in this poem is to open her verse to resonances with Eliot, Yeats, and other leading modernists, in addition to Stevens. Newly evident are the high literary ambitions and elaborately detailed characters of such writers, along with their echoes of past masters. Indeed, The Crown can be seen as a belated entry in the 20th century tradition of the portrait of a lady that includes the Henry James novel and the T.S. Eliot poem, both of which have that title, and Ezra Pound's Portrait d'une Femme. Some of Bridgford's repeating lines strikingly echo the haunting ending of the Pound poem. No, there is nothing in the whole and all, nothing that's quite your own, yet this is you. While Bridgford's quiet, measured, poetic voice had always been attuned to emotional nuance, here she had, for the first time, fully repeated the subtle drift of a mind as it moves from despair to hope. Near the end of the poem, in the last sonnet, both the poet and her subject come to a stirring realization. And these are Kim's lines. It's not that everything has died, it's been reborn. Your fingers steeple God, and you think just now of what you can become. Thank you. It's a pleasure for me now to introduce Allison Joseph.
Hello, I'm Allison Joseph. Can everyone hear me? Hi, I'm Allison Joseph, coming to you from Carbondale, Illinois. The piece I'd like to read to you today is called In Pursuit of Black Excellence, an Appreciation of Kim Bridgford. When I think of Black excellence, I think of Kim Bridgford. You may say, that's weird, that petite white woman, elegant as she is a paragon of Black excellence? Yes, let me explain. Kim Bridgford knew Black lives mattered long before it was fashionable to say so. Moreover, Kim knew Black art matters, Black joy, and Black beauty. In an age where writers' conferences and events can be separate but equal, or else downright segregated, Kim Bridgford didn't just make room for Black writers at the table. She made the table bigger and forced the often white, Eurocentric world of formalist poetry to embrace and enjoy Black writers and other poets of color. Between the Westchester Form and Narrative Conference and Poetry by the Sea, The list of Black writers Kim presented to the world reads like a who's who of African American literature. Rita Dove, Kwame Dawes, Marilyn Nelson, Terrence Hayes, Tahimba Jess, Adrian Matika, Lynn Thompson, Natasha Trethewey, Mahogany L. Brown, Keith Wilson, Tara Betts, the late great Monica Hand, Kevin Young, Tiana Clark, our dear Russell Goins, and Michael Brown. The list is expansive, and I find myself honored and humbled to be one of the many Black writers Kim Bridgford brought into the fold, not just once, but over and over again, many times. To Kim, the Black experience was the epitome of the American experience. No other conference I can think of would have presented a tribute to fellow paragon of excellence, Rita Dove, through the music of jazz percussionist Warren Smith. I can still see Rita's utterly delighted face as one legend honored another. At that same edition of Poetry by the Sea, I took a cell phone photo of Marilyn Nelson embracing Rita, and I knew that Kim's vision of poetry, in Kim's vision of poetry, to be Black is to be beautiful and worthy and necessary. The next day, Warren Smith was supposed to lead a workshop for high school students, another constituency, young people, young poets that Kim cared deeply about. But he didn't make it back to Connecticut, so Kim asked me if I could step in at the last minute, a heady request, but she wouldn't have asked it if she didn't see Black excellence in me. I rose to the challenge, taught on the fly, and we had a great time talking music and poetry and life. And that's the legacy Kim leaves us, a celebration of excellence in all its facets and colors, a table where all are celebrated, a place for poetry and music and food and wine. In Kim's poetry, I see echoes of the great poet Gwendolyn Brooks. And thinking of Gwendolyn Brooks and Kim Bridgford, I want to close my piece by reading a poem of Kim's from her collection Undone. This poem is entitled Beneath the Shabbiness, and I hope that all of us continue Kim's legacy and find that finger width of dream that she talks about in this poem. Beneath the shabbiness. Beneath the shabbiness of all your days, you find some moments strewn like wildest need, grown quiet. Their secret comes with their surprise. A finger width of dream has sprung to seed. Stop there. Push the pleasure of the greed, the shine of spangles and the long applause from years ago. Your wandering soul is laid beneath the shabbiness of all your days. Yet memory is fickle. A baby cries, then and then is gone. The day your daughter died, your arms felt limp as lost parentheses. You find some moments strewn like wildest need. It's easier not to want too much, the odd markings of a leaf, the way a shutter sighs, as if to say, come back, a teapot's load grown quiet. Their secret comes with their surprise. You wish the world was not made up of eyes that judge the dingy surfaces. Instead, look, underneath this faded enterprise, a finger width of dream has sprung to seed. Perhaps that's how the human life is made, to keep that hope like shining in disguise when time says no. To live is to recede until what you loved most of all is a tease beneath the shabbiness.
Thanks, Allison. That was beautiful. It's my pleasure to introduce Wendy Sloan.
Hello, hi everyone. Hello. I don't seem to be, I'm coming to you from New York, New York. I'm Wendy Sloan. I hope everyone can hear me and see me, I hope. Is that working? Okay, hi. I focused on, thank you. I focused on Bridgford's social conscience as reflected in her poetry. Clearly, it permeates her poetry as it permeated her life and her other work as founder and director of so many institutions that enabled and encouraged so many people to fulfill their human potential, while she was at the same time always engaged in the process of fulfilling her own human potential. And so I say social conscience rather than political conscience, because for Bridgford, as we used to say in the early days of the women's movement revival in the 1970s, the personal was political, or conversely stated, the political was always personal and rooted in her moral and spiritual convictions. I'm going to read some excerpts from a few of her more autobiographical poems where she laid out those moral and values and traced her own journey to self-knowledge and self-fulfillment from Coal Valley, Illinois, where she grew up, and back to Coal Valley area where she died. And the first of those poems is from the book Bully Pulpit, which is a pretty amazing book published in 2012. I'm going to read from the middle section, which is the section called Private, as opposed to public, the first section. There's a character in the poem called Helen, which Helen's story is a family story, I guess, passed down to Bridgford by her family. It's a sad story. It's somewhat of an American Gothic story that must have made a big impression on Bridgford as a child, because Helen was also the subject of a poem 7 years earlier in the book Instead of Maps. And that poem is Her Sister's Hands, if you'd like to look it up. Here we go. Genealogy, After the Blue Terrence by Terence Hayes. I come from people who laughed and said they were birthed from pirates who threw the E from Bridgford into the ocean, onto the back and forth trundle of the rough salt air, because in the new world, you can start out fresh, be economical. On the other side of the family, children were taken away. Helen, whose legs never grew, like a human fish, swimming through the bottoms of chairs. The other, who was nameless, deaf. They died in a mental hospital. Those things happen, my grandmother said, as if she had just fried up liver and onions and eaten them clean. I come from people who know how to work, who work as if life itself were work. And it is. Marriage, death, pain, these are to be endured. I come from women who have given up everything for their men but their children, their love like a handmade scarf too embarrassing for the outside world. I come from men who late in life discovered their jobs had abandoned them, the gold watches and plaques inadequate for the hours spent away from home. I come from a place where dreams were clumsy on the big, wide lines, then wadded up because you had to take care of others who had given up for you, who had had lives given up for them. And this giving up was a contract you signed before you were born. You did not move away to cities like New York, dirty, full of strangers, because belief in our Lord Jesus Christ was like a name tag to be read by thieves. I always thought my story was about my grandmother. When I was 6, she fed me salt instead of sugar because she could. April fooled me into thinking she had bought me a kitten. I come from a drive-through town where you could go to church or die as a teenager on the winding, unlit roads. I come home to rest, to be who I was, whoever that was, driving through the shadows of the cut down trees, circling the new trees, naked as gifts that no one wants, because they too grow. They grow up. And the next poem in the book is called Ruined People. I'll just read a little from it. It reminds me in vision, of course not in style, it's a free verse style, but it reminds me in vision of Blake somewhat, and especially when he said, quote, "And we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love." Ruined people. Is it just Eden we're talking about, ducking guiltily out of the dark wood, the sodden mysteries, what we could have been and what we can still be, but aren't? What I'm saying is it in us, not a place, the moment between the way we shine and the way we don't? Now skipping. Yesterday, inside a market, a man yelled at me, and I turned in a crowd of strangers to hear him say, "You dropped your glove." It seemed like a rose on a stage, dramatic as a bird, sprawled and woolen. I kneeled to pick it up. When I gestured, "Thank you," you would think the heavens had opened. Eden. No wonder they left. It's so hard, looking back at all that blissful shining, the long last lick of innocence. Who can stand it? Yet, who can stand anything without it? And this book, Human Interest, was published in 2016, so not so long after Bridgford left Westchester, her directorship, not Westchester, but her directorship of the Westchester Poetry Center and Conference, and founded this conference, Poetry by the Sea. And this book, this poem is called See, as in see no evil, see, S-E-E, See. It's not what people don't see. It's what they see and live with. People who are hurt grow up to hurt others. We know this. So why are we surprised about the boy pushed against the bare wood of a changing room, and how his cry changes nothing about the world but his own? How underneath a sheen of goodness there are things that daily happen to people? Even the priests say, as one said to me, that everybody has a side. You see what I mean? We all know the stories. The fat kid who grows up to hurt successful women, bullying them over the internet. The boy in the changing room who pulls his swimming trunks up over his shaking hips, and years later, in a college dorm room, writes to his teacher, the same woman bullied by the grown-up fat boy, the teacher who turns out to be me, that one day he was broken. He still knows the exact smell of the changing room and the feeling of that wood against his face. He had trouble walking afterwards. And what could he say? And if he did, what would happen? That's what they knew in Eden when the skin of the apple broke and they walked out the gate. So it was for the boy. The world went on. He wants to be the boy he was before everything and nothing changed. It is the nothing that has killed him, and she cannot give him the gift he wants. She can correct his grammar. She can applaud the honesty that pounds in her chest. She knows this, even while she waits for another message from the bully, who is the chair of her department, who will CC others so they can witness and take pleasure in his delicate and dagger-like assault. Later, he becomes a dean for his proactive leadership. See, we say we want the truth, but when the statues fall and they have lost all the old meanings, relics of our worship, tenders of desire, we don't like the absence left behind. We side with cruelty because we know it, the way we know the inside of our mouths and tongue, their intimate structures. because of all the things we teach each other, we learn that best. And finally, and briefly, Bridgford also wrote a lot of poems about sex roles all through her writing career, especially, of course, in Dolls, the 2014 book, where she could examine sex roles through the vehicle of various dolls, like the inflatable doll, a lot of potential there, the iconic Barbie doll. And the last poem in the book is To the Women Poets, dedicated to her timeline sisters. I draw your attention to that. I'm going to read one of the Persephone poems. The Persephone poems are again in Bully Pulpit. They're another section in Bully Pulpit. I love them. I think they're a scream. And the first of them is Persephone Falls in Love with Hades. That's one of Kim's sexy poems. You can read that to yourself. I'm going to read the second one. I think this, well, I know this shows another side of Bridgford, maybe than the one that we've talked about mostly today, but her propensity to grab hold of life and enjoy it, and of course her terrific resilience. Persephone leads a double life. Half the year on Earth, half the year below. She is a woman with a secret smile, a woman who has found how easy it can be to step through a door. Her mother wanted her to stay in her hometown, join the garden club, golf, teach Sunday school at the local church. What do you do when you have a lover and a mother? You do it all. You walk the line. You move from 6 months to 6 months. Your dizziness astonishes you. In the end, of course, your mother wanted you to marry someone else. You do that too. He is steady and strong and looks at you as if you never lived all those months away. In the end, you stand on the fault line, pray there's no earthquake, but your heart. Thank you, Dr. Kim Bridgford.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Wendy. Wonderful to hear those private poems in Bully Pulpit, because it shows you how fluent she was. Those poems are in free verse and they're marvelous. And thanks for tying the personal to the political. Now it's my good fortune to introduce Joyce Wilson. Joyce?
Thank you very much. This is Joyce Wilson from Scituate, Massachusetts, and I'm delighted to be here with Allison and Wendy and David. I'm going to talk about Kim Bridgford's book, Epiphanies. The poems in Kim Bridgford's collection, Epiphanies, which came out in 2013 with David Roberts Books, present her versions of some of the well-known stories of the Bible. She is working in a tradition that walks the line or crosses the line between the Bible as literature and as a holy book. These poems capture Bridgford's spiritual bravery. They also demonstrate her humor, often feminine and feminist, her investigation into friendship, what it is to be a friend, what does a friend sound like, how does a friend act, and her commitment to beauty. Bridgford describes her view of the importance of beauty in poetry in a brief statement online at Peacock Journal. She explains, I value beauty above all in poetry, not as a matter of style, but of resonance in emotion and in subjects central to women's lives. Beauty works when it appears along with form, emotion, surprise, and imagery. And the recombination of these elements propels me to redefine, reread, and reconsider. Beauty for me is always a part of what my teacher Donald Justice called the Platonic script. Examples of this definition of beauty can be found throughout the collection. Each poem represents an epiphany or showing forth of Bridgford's evocation of divine beauty. Epiphanies is a book of sonnets, 13 based on Old Testament stories and 13 based on New Testament stories. The sonnet forms are primarily Petrarchan and Shakespearean. The spaces between the quatrains, sestets, and couplets vary, however, so that the reader is not lulled into expecting repeated visual forms on succeeding pages. This variety with presentation is an alert to the reader to expect a variety of form and subjects. In the first poem, a Petrarchan sonnet, Satan presents his side of the case. Bridgford depicts Satan as a familiar, conniving guy who feels justified in blaming God for the way things turned out. It is interesting to note that the name Satan means adversary in Hebrew. Satan defines his purpose at the end of the first quatrain, and that's where I will start with Myths to Shatter. And here the author also announces her purpose for her book, To Shatter Myths. The speaker, the fallen angel, addresses himself as divided. 1 minute in the second person, you, the next person in the first person, I. He is in the middle of an argument with God, the one who bears the capitalized pronoun he, and whines that he might have been more negotiable. The sestet with the Petrarchan rhyme scheme matches the word ends in the first line with friends in line 6. I might have fallen back to peaceful ends, an angel who, with admiration, tried to emulate and fill my soul with pride. I like to think I would have listened then. I like to think we would have battled sin. I like to think that we could have been friends. As Bridgford develops the theme of friendship, she begins on this ironic note. Besides defining what the author has set out to do, this opening poem gives Bridgford a great deal of flexibility preparing for what is to come. Other poems maintain a subversive sense of humor in their points of view. The poem Solomon's Test adopts a feminist tone as the narrator speaks like a defense attorney who disputes the efficacy of the initial premise of the case. Solomon's Test. A mother would not cut her child in two. She'd rather have another woman raise her son. Yes, she would rather let him go. And if this were to pass, she'd stand, mouth open, grief and garments billowy and wild, dust in her mouth and eyes and throat. She grieves the blade before it falls, before the child is lopped in two. And she who agrees to halves, half love, half truths, half measures, half a skin, might as well have been born another creature, a stone or tree, a lacy filigree of mosses. A mother doesn't trade her dead son in, agree to watch the knife blade enter skin. A mother doesn't calculate her losses. This characterization of the outraged mother asks the patriarchal court to sit up and re-examine the terms of the case before it levies judgment. The contrast between the mother's grief, billowy and wild, with the blade of the knife that falls and lops in two, underscore the differences in dynamics used by the narrator, the soft and the harsh. These are some of the examples of the 13 poems from the Old Testament. The poems in the New Testament also number 13 and continue with the sonnet form. The New Testament section emphasizes the resurrection, the miracle of life after death, the literal rendering of rising from the grave. We see pairings of ideas throughout. In the first poem, the birth is a sign of a beginning and an end. the baby, a symbol of promise and fulfillment. The poems about the Holy Family describe, in the person of Mary, how she is engaged in the pursuit of the right simile as she asks, what does God's sex feel like? Jesus begins with the observation about his parents. They were the only family I ever knew. The poem Imagining God shows him as one who remains apart, who plays his role according to the Platonic rules that keep him removed, perfect, relying on his son to report back, to know, to embody the realities of human life and suffering. The last set of sonnets among these New Testament stories recreates the story of Lazarus through dialogue. In a series of 6, 3 sonnets take the point of view of Lazarus and 3 the point of view of Jesus. Each sonnet is narrated in the first person. The title, That Stillness, introduces the notion of stillness in death. The sonnets focused on the point of view of Jesus stay close to the gospel. Each poem is a uniquely described meditation. I am the resurrection and the life, and Lazarus is proof. I am his instrument, who unwraps truth from daily life to show doubt for what it is, and leaves instead a miracle. Here, Jesus delivers his theology about life and death and the example of Lazarus. The significance of the phrase unwraps truth is a particularly fine literal addition to the phrases we know so well. In her sonnets that show the point of view of Lazarus, Bridgford creates her most beautiful imagery. She emphasizes the awareness and knowledge of Lazarus in concrete details about his dying, his going away and coming back, his ability to remember the experience. In the first sonnet, Lazarus asks himself, "For who was I without my knowing? More like the darkness in its daily fall, more like the stone, more like the body going, collapsing in time." The benefit of experience and wisdom of knowing what it is like to have died and to be called back to life prepare for his reprieve and mercy. The second poem, in the voice of Lazarus, expands on sensations of being dead, of dreaming, of floating, the shock of returning to live in the world, but still remembering the confinement of the grave. Lazarus. Later, it was difficult for me, for how do you explain to anyone the line that stands between mortality and death? At night, sometimes, as I drank wine, I'd sit in silence, driving myself back to nothing. And after a while, I could do it, become the cave I lay in. And with luck, sometimes I could go further when I knew it again. For just a moment, I would float within the darkness made of birth and death. When morning came, I'd tremble when I ate, but then the world came back and I could breathe. I knew inside the body was the soul, that stillness in the middle of it all. The lines about awareness, floating within darkness, the close proximity of birth and death, the contrast between sensations of being alive and able to eat and drink and breathe, enhance the distinction between the body and the soul. The final couplet echoes the sounds of body was the soul and middle of it all, creating a resonating experience. Bridgford has found a way to demonstrate the quality of soul life as an exquisite perfection of being. She has achieved her perquisite in beauty in poetry. One cannot think about Lazarus and poetry without recalling Sylvia Plath's treatment of her story in her poem, Lady Lazarus. But Plath, who shows an interest in the topic of death in many of her poems, demonstrates the female figure who triumphs over death and assumes individual power. Bridgford's poem is about the tranquility of the soul. This sequence of poems ends with the utterance of Jesus, the Son of the Divine Father, with the sins of the world upon his shoulders. It is interesting to note that Bridgford does not introduce the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha, and their well-known response to Jesus, hospitality versus prayer, nor does she mention that Lazarus was a known friend of Jesus, which was why he traveled to be with the family upon his death. Instead, Bridgford does show what kind of a friend Jesus was at the man's side, as if whispering in his ear. We do not have beginning or end except on earth. Trust that there is something better. You'll rise again. I know what you've been through. I suffered human life, and so do you. With these lines, Bridgford's collection ends. In the Bible, the story of Lazarus prefigures the ultimate revelation of Jesus' mission and purpose, for soon he will experience his own death and resurrection. Here, Bridgford dramatizes what Jesus might have said to the man who feared death, to all of us who fear death or grieve a death. I know what you've been through. And at wakes and funerals, we cannot say this to presume to know what the aggrieved have endured, but Jesus can say this. You have suffered. I know you're suffering. With these words, Bridgford shows how the friendship between Jesus and Lazarus was spoken, not as an argument or negotiation, but as a gift, quiet, personal, and loving. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. I love the way you read that Lazarus poem. Yeah, I marvel at these four different points of view we've presented, and how rich and varied a range this poet had and has for us now. And I think this is only a start, in a way, to unwrapping her work and looking at it as a in toto. There are so many aspects to look at. There's the wonderful social consciousness, for instance, that Wendy pointed to, and the spiritual side that Joyce pointed to, and of course that side of her that connects to the different sides, to the minority and the majority and so forth, that Allison pointed to. I think there are so many sides, and I think this is a really great example of what range Kim had as a poet, and it's hard to see that as those books came out one after the other, seemingly like just from a day-to-day concern, and here they are all together. There's a corpus, there's an oeuvre that we can look at. So I want to thank you so much for attending, folks, and to my wonderful panelists here. And I'm grateful to Anna Evans, Nicole, Caruso, Garcia, and Russell Goings, and to Linda Stern for enabling us to celebrate Kim and her work. Thanks so much. Did I bullshit?
My condolences to Kim's family first. Even though in a literary way we were all Kim's family, for the closest and dearest, space is reserved. In my space, I'd like to read a snippet from Kim's second book, the one titled Instead of Maps. She didn't conceive this piece as autobiography, of course, but for me, the words retain a deep imprint of her, the woman, Kim Bridgford. The impossible for you was like a cup you drank from. And you, in turn, believed that when you suffered, you were lifted up. And when you trusted, you were loved. Kim trusted, and the people who met her at conferences year after year learned to return that trust as a form of love. A fellow like me from a small, loosely populated political world, I trusted. Year after year, I took the freeway down from Massachusetts or up from New York to merge in a formal way among like-minded people in lectures or workshops, over meals and in dormitory sitting rooms, and lastly, in the social gatherings at the end of another stimulating day. Kim didn't generate that pattern of experiences on her own. A hierarchy of leaders and support people were involved. But Kim managed those experiences, and she cajoled and nursed and lent shape to them. The seminars, the readings, the meal times, and the various evening carryovers. Under her management, initial concepts grew into meetings made for additional contacts, and generated friendship, camaraderie. Friendship inspired ongoing exchanges and, of course, new projects, always new writing projects, either at Westchester or later at Poetry by the Sea. So this is William Connolly's appreciation of Kim Bridgford, personal and ongoing. May the angels of our future attend. Kim nudged shy green talents from the shade of full-grown poets. Every different learner knew, inquire, and she'd point up the coursework best for you. If you were mulling how to fence stampeding raw experience into a canny narrative, she could smile and shortlist real classroom alternatives. And yet she managed well enough not to manage stuff too closely. Kim set folk carving personal schemes in their own spans of English oak. Kim lent speech to spirit and thereby helped us hear it. The measured choices folded into metaphor, the singing range of mortal voices. Thanks, Kim. And thanks to your family, greatly extended.
Hello, this is Alicia Stallings coming to you from Athens, Greece. It is my privilege to introduce the poet Julie Cain. Julie Cain's work is something I've appreciated for decades. I've been a friend and a fan for decades. My fandom, I think, precedes our friendship. Julie Cain was born in Boston, but I think we associate her most with Louisiana, where she has lived for many decades and has many books whose titles I think we would associate with that: Jazz Funeral, Rhythm and Blues, with Louisiana and with New Orleans. She has even served as the poet laureate of the state of Louisiana, among her many honors, which include a Fulbright. As a poet, she is very interesting to me because she is one of the female poets of formalism, but she has something different, I think, from what we associate with the neo-formalist movement, where many of us are descendants in some ways from Robert Frost, Richard Wilbur, Elizabeth Bishop, Emily Dickinson, this kind of strain. Julie Cain, I think, comes to formalism from a very interesting and unusual place. If you think about poets being the love child of two other poets, I was thinking that Julie Cain would be the love child of John Donne and Anne Sexton. The reason I say this is I realized teaching a course on metaphysical poetry that Julie Cain is in many ways a metaphysical poet. She has a way with metaphor where she yokes together extremely different things in this kind of violence of the imagination, which is also very generative. As far as Anne Sexton was in fact a teacher and mentor of Julie's. Julie was in Anne Sexton's class in that time period when Anne Sexton killed herself. But I think what Julie brings from Anne Sexton is a certain candor. She is a poet who is both formal and confessional. So Julie Cain can nail a sonnet dead. She can do wonderful vervy things with syllabics, but her subject matter is often a confessional subject matter, and a certain candor and frankness with sexuality and sex, and a kind of body humor, which I very much enjoy that she has. But she also has this John Donne side. She has a sonnet called Particle Physics, which starts out being about particles and entanglement of particles, and by the end, whoosh, we're talking about relationships and baseball. It's kind of an amazing thing that she does there. She's a poet whose formal choices and verve I appreciate and admire very much. Her syllabic poem, Egrets, is one of my all-time favorite bird poems, and that is saying a lot. I am very sorry that this year we have been so far apart from all of our poetry friends and family, and in this year when we have lost Kim. Julie and I were once roommates at AWP, which is one of the highlights of my memories of that conference ever. And I'm sorry that we cannot be together in this celebration of Kim's life. But it is my pleasure to introduce Julie Cain.
Thank you so much to Anna and the board for inviting me to give this talk, to Alicia for introducing me, and to Kim for bringing us together. I miss you so much. The title of my talk is The Fluidity of Form. If there is one thing that bothers me about being part of the formalist poetry community, it's the assumption held by some inside that community and by most outside that community that poetic forms have rules. As far back in time as we can trace them, poetic forms have been fluid, not fixed, crossing national, ethnic, and linguistic borders with ease, and picking up variations and innovations from their adaptation in new cultural contexts or by individual experimenting poets. As someone who spent several years researching and writing a doctoral dissertation on the villanelle's transition from a 16th century Italian musical genre to a so-called English language fixed poetic form, I groan when I come across a definition of the form that insists it has to be in iambic pentameter or that it has to be 19 lines long. The 16th century Italian villanella had a musical form, not a poetic one. Unlike its contemporary, the polyphonic madrigal, which was through composed, with each word of a poetic text set to a unique note or notes, the harmonic villanella was a refrain song with 4 or more verses. It was sung to 3 strains of music, A, B, and C, one for the verse, one for the refrain, and one for the bridge line between them. Villanella composers used a lot of black notes, making for livelier rhythms than those of the madrigal, and they imitated musical features characteristic of untrained voices singing peasant songs, such as a limited note range, octaves, and parallel fifths. Those early villanella lyrics were not lofty authored poems like madrigal texts, but rather anonymous patchwork compositions loaded with stock phrases, proverbs, and off-color puns. Musicologist Donna Cardamone examined 188 early lyrics published between 1537 and 1539 and found dozens of different rhyme schemes, refrains ranging from 1 to 5 lines in length, and no consistency whatsoever to the number of syllables per line. The fact that each verse after the first had to be sung to the same tune also limited the literary quality of the lyrics, as anyone who has struggled to fit the syllables of the second or third stanza of a Christmas carol, hymn, or anthem to the tune of the first stanza has discovered on their own. The 19th century scholar George Saintsbury, who for some reason is still highly regarded for his writings on form, called the villanelle one of the French poetic forms of the 13th through 15th centuries. Likewise, English poet and critic Edmund Gosse dated it as a French fixed form back at least as far as the 15th century. Typical mansplainers, they were both completely sure of themselves and completely wrong. Songbooks of Italian musical villanelle were wildly popular in 16th century France, going through multiple reprintings, and French poets were fully aware of the phenomenon. At the time I wrote my dissertation, 18 French poems of the the 16th and early 17th centuries with the titles villanelle or villanesque had been identified, the convention of the time being to title a poem according to its poetic genre designation. Written by 9 different poets, no 2 of those 18 poetic villanelles were alike in terms of rhyme scheme, line length, and syllable counts per line. They ranged anywhere from 4 to 9 stanzas in length. What they did have in common was being rustic in feel with a refrain, like the musical villanelle. One of those 16th century French poetic villanelles was 19 lines long, and in the A1B, A2 pattern we recognize as the villanelles today. Written by Jean Passerat, it began with the refrain line, J'ai perdu ma tourterelle, or I have lost my turtle dove, and it was about a turtle dove grieving for its lost mate. None of the other French poetic villanelles of the era resembled it even slightly in form. Not even the one other villanelle poem written by Jean Passerat himself. And there would not be a second French poetic villanelle written in that pattern until the 19th century. Jean Passerat's Turtle Dove poem was familiar to 19th century French students because of its inclusion in anthologies. So in the year 1845, when poet Theodore de Bondy wanted to satirize the distress of a Parisian journal editor who had lost his best writer, Poulain Limerick, he seized upon Passerot's highly recognizable poem for his opening line and rhyme scheme, just as Randy Rainbow today uses familiar show tunes as the basis for his political satires. J'ai perdu mon limerick, or I have lost my limerick, was 19 lines long with a 4-line final stanza, like the Passerot original. First Bondy's immediate circle of literary friends, and then other French poets began writing villanelles of their own in what they perceived to be an ancient poetic tradition. But then as now, the number of stanzas in those French poetic villanelles was not fixed, as long as the final stanza fit the A-B, A1, A2 pattern. They could go on for pages. The form quickly spread to England and then to America, where the French pattern of making the A rhymes feminine and the B rhymes masculine did not suit the sounds of English and got abandoned. And initially, there was no consensus on the number of stanzas. The first anthology of fixed form poems published in England came out in 1887, edited by Gleason White. Of the 32 villanelles in the collection, 26 had 6 stanzas, like Passerot's original and Bandy's satire. 2 had 8 stanzas, 2 had 9, and 2 more had 10. Most were iambic, but varying from trimeter to tetrameter to pentameter, while others were trochaic in their meter, like Get Edmund Goss's awful specimen beginning, "Little mistress, mine goodbye, dig my grave, for I must die." For those who insist that the villanelle's rules cannot be broken, I ask you, at exactly what point in time do you mark the imposition of those rules? Several other of the French fixed forms had their roots in medieval round dances, with verses sung by a soloist and the refrain by a chorus. The shortened refrain of the poetic form we know as the rondo, consisting of only the first word or phrase of the first line of the poem, is believed to have come about because medieval scribes got sick of writing out the same refrain line over and over again, and so abbreviated it after line 1. Are we to treat the accidentally created form of the rondo as if it dropped down from Mount Olympus? It is strange, though, how some poetic accidents, like the truncated refrain of the rondo or the 19th century parody of Passerot's villanelle, catch on as new forms. The more practitioners such a new form gathers, the more authentic or reputable it will appear. At the risk of sounding like the Marianne Williamson of poetics, I can't help thinking of Rupert Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance here. Sheldrake believes that when a living creature acquires a new behavior that leads to successful outcomes, and others of its species observe and begin to adopt the new behavior, like a bird learning to peck open the top of a milk bottle delivered to a front porch, it generates a morphogenetic field that causes subsequent creatures of its kind to learn the behavior faster or to inherit a sort of memory of it. Just putting that thought out there. Snobs about the rules of poetic form are most often snobbish about meter, forgetting that English language meter is also the result of formal elements that cross borders and evolve to suit new contexts. Greek poetic meter was based on the duration of syllables, long or short, not stressed or unstressed, as in English. Attempts to write quantitative meter in English have always flopped, that it's impossible for our ears to register the subtle durational difference between long and short syllables like pine and pin. But where would English language literature be without the iamb, which in ancient Greece was the metrical unit associated with invective, the poetry of spewed personal hatred and anger? The Greek iamb was actually not even a foot, but a metron, or pair of 2 feet. The first foot had a variable syllable followed by a long one, while only the second foot was short followed by long. The first foot of the iamb disappeared in the transition from Greek to Latin poetry, even though classical Latin poetry was also quantitative. The metrical tradition native to English was accentual, counting only the number of strong stresses per line, not syllables. It can be seen in Anglo-Saxon strong stress poetry, as well as the rhythms of oral tradition ballads and nursery rhymes. But the artificial patterning of English language verse, based on a reimagining of an imported formal feature, is what gave us the rhythms of Shakespeare's plays, Paradise Lost, and much of Emily Dickinson. In her case, influenced by iambic hymn meters of 3 or 4 feet per line, not the literary iambic pentameter. Still, iambic meter in English would be mechanical and dull if poets did not vary it when their ears told them it sounded better that way. Marina Talinskaya found that Shakespeare inverted the first foot of his blank verse lines about 42% of the time. How did free verse arise in America? Well, the undisputed grandfather of American free verse was Walt Whitman, whose lines are often structured by parallelism, the repetition of the same syntactical structure or semantic sense in 2 succeeding lines. This was a formal principle of ancient Hebrew poetry and of verse passages in the Old Testament, which is where Whitman encountered it. Whatever other metrical features may have characterized ancient Hebrew poetry have been lost to us over time, but Whitman adapted this element to his own use, putting his own personal spin on it so that the parallelism comes across as an echo, but not an exact duplication of syntax or semantics. The other major influence on American free verse was the Imagist movement, which owed a debt to Ezra Pound's fascination with Ernest Fenollosa's notes on Chinese poetry. Fenollosa, who did not read Chinese and relied upon Japanese translations, failed to understand that Chinese characters could represent sounds as well as visual images of the thing itself. But without that misunderstanding, would we have Pound's free verse translations of classical Chinese poems, which ignored the rhyme schemes and regulated syllable counts of the originals? Those free verse translations foregrounding concrete visual images led to the Imagist movement, which led to poetic modernism, which is still influencing American and international poetry today. I've been speaking mainly about formal elements from poetic traditions that crossed into English because that is the literature I know best, but this is by no means a one-way street. Take, for example, the ghazal, which was a sung genre like the villanelle in its origins in 7th century Arabia, not a poetic form. From there, it crossed over into other language cultures, including Urdu, Hindi, and Spanish. But it was in medieval Persia that it took on the formal poetic features we associate with it today: couplets, its rhyme scheme, and its refrain at the tail end of the second line of each couplet. The ghazal crossed over into German poetry during the Romantic era of the early 19th century, losing its quantitative meters in the process, and only belatedly into English language poetry. American free verse influenced the poetics of cultures around the world. The means by which it entered Japanese poetics is particularly interesting. An anthology of English language poems translated into Japanese came out in Japan in 1882, titled in English translation, A Collection of Poetry in the New Style. Although the poets included, like Longfellow and Tennyson, worked in rhyme and meter, the translations were most often rendered in a Japanese 7/5 syllabic sequence. But the longer lengths of the translated poems and the variations from traditional Japanese syllabic schemes in some of the translations felt revolutionary to then contemporary Japanese poets. This new style later spread from Japan to Korea. Cultural appropriation has very rightly received much attention of late. It is most offensive when being done by a member of a colonialist or dominant culture to a subjugated or minority culture. In the words of scholar Kirsten Johnson, the appropriator who does not experience the oppression is able to play temporarily an exotic other without experiencing any of the daily discriminations faced by other cultures. Even writing in the voice of a subjugated or minority other in a persona poem now raises ethical considerations. As poet Paisley Rekdal, author of the nonfiction book Appropriate, writes, because what we're really talking about with cultural appropriation X is identity. But I came across a post on social media recently suggesting that the use of a poetic form by someone not native to its originating context may constitute cultural appropriation. That notion is troubling. Poetic form is a generating principle, not an identity or artifact, and it is the nature of poetic forms and formal features to cross borders that stop languages and poems, adapt to new cultural contexts, and spark further experimentation by individual poets, going as far back in time as we can trace written verse history. Yet I think we should take heed of the fact that this issue could even be raised. Contributing to a colloquium on cultural appropriation in the arts, novelist and translator John Keane wrote, cultural borrowing and exchange are central to dynamism in art and life, but taking that goes in only one direction, that occurs with the presumption of privilege and entitlement, and without humility or self-questioning, that happens without respect for the group from which any cultural artifact or trace is being taken, and that is done without attribution or elision of the origins and sources of the cultural artifact, constitute cultural appropriation, especially in the ways it is now regularly and rightly being criticized. For me, this passage brings to mind Agha Shahid Ali's introduction to his anthology, Ravishing Disunities, Real Ghazals in English, in which he both laments the lack of understanding by American poets of the form's origins and cultural contexts, and acknowledges his admiration for many of the so-called ghazals lacking rhymes and refrains as produced by poets like Adrian Rich and Galway Canal. I believe that those of us who teach creative writing and who include assignments to write in form owe it to our students to teach the cultural context out of which those forms originated, as well as the fact that forms undergo change in the transition to new cultural contexts and new practitioners. Along with strict examples of poems in supposedly fixed form, we need to show examples of poets using forms as jumping off points for their own improvisations. one of Terence Hayes' American sonnets for my past and future assassin, together with one of Shakespeare's sonnets, for example. This approach both honors the cultural context out of which forms arose and conveys to young writers the concept of form as a living force. The practice of introducing forms as if they have rules that drop down out of the sky is a falsification of history, an erasure of cultural origins, and a disservice to young poets who might otherwise make it new. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 Kim Bridgford Memorial Sonnet Contest and the Poetry by the Sea Book Awards portion of the Poetry by the Sea Spring Celebration, honoring Kim Bridgford, conference founder and director. I am Nicole Caruso Garcia, an advisory board member and the Sonnet Contest Coordinator, joining you from Trumbull, Connecticut. Thank you to everyone who has submitted since our inaugural year. I invite you to check out the contest archives at poetrybytheseaconference.org, where you will find bios and the full text of the winning sonnets you will hear tonight. As a prelude to celebrating the winning poems and books, I'll share briefly how these contests came to be. In 2018, Kim Bridgford said, and I'm paraphrasing, Poetry by the Sea needs to establish a sonnet contest. Poets feel a void now that the Nemerov Award has reached its final year. We have to fill that need. She was emphatic about this, and always envisioning the next enhancement, she decided there would be two areas of competition. One for single sonnets, the other sonnet crowns. She later decided the conference would also sponsor a book award for books of poems published in the previous year. Kim believed in recognizing and celebrating excellence, and she saw these contests as an extension of the conference itself. Create spaces where people can pursue excellence and special things will happen. When we launched the sonnet contest, because Kim had Edna St. Vincent Millay in mind, we called it Putting Chaos into 14 Lines. After Kim's death in June 2020, we were reeling, but in our grief, we found meaning in renaming the contest in honor of Kim, a steward of the arts committed to serving the needs of the poetry community, the accomplished poet who has been called America's First Lady of Form, our beloved friend who loved the sonnet form. This year, we made monetary awards to winners in the categories of individual sonnets, sonnet crowns, and books of poetry published in 2020. Our judges are Jenna Lay for sonnets and sonnet crowns, and Barbara Crooker for books. Jenna Lay, a 2-time sonnet winner herself, is the author of 2 books of poetry. Barbara Crooker is the author of 9 books of poetry and was the winner of Poetry by the Sea's Best Book during its inaugural year. And with that, I turn things over to this year's contest judges to announce the award winners. Jenna?
Hi, I'm Jenna Lee, and I'm in New York right now. So I'm here to introduce the winners of the sonnet and sonnet crown competitions. The winner of the sonnet competition this year was David Southward for his sonnet, An Aging Poet Explains. These are the words I wrote about the sonnet. Despite the generality of its themes, this wise and compassionate poem miraculously succeeds in making a case for empathy in a way that feels fresh. Although its bent is toward the didactic, it doesn't feel preachy, using just enough gentle humor to help its message go down easy. It includes lovely lines like, while summer wraps their limbs in gathered light, this hidden half digests a springtime pain. These lines elegantly transform time into space, seasons into altitudes. The poem's last 6 lines present essential metaphor undergoing a dexterous expansion. Because a tree's roots cannot be seen, the poet recommends the mental exercise of picturing people as trees being reflected in a pool, the branches mirror images becoming stand-ins for the roots. This sets up the poet's thunderclap of a last line in which this water image, slyly introduced a few lines earlier, becomes the basis for an unexpectedly rich emotional payoff. Unostentatious, working with only the simplest tools, this sonnet succeeds through seasoned craft and solid construction in achieving a profoundness that feels honestly earned. So I'd like to introduce David Southward.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for those kind words. And I'd like to say a quick thanks to Nicole and Anna and everyone who helped to organize this event, as well as the contest. And also to say just how grateful I am to have met Kim Bridgford at Poetry by the Sea in 2018. And what an honor it is to have her name associated with this award. An Aging Poet Explains. The problem is that people are like trees. Although they think and speak and walk around, they're growths of buried systems no one sees, whose roots, like an inverted broccoli crown, anchor them to the soils of home and school. While summer wraps their limbs in gathered light, this hidden half digests a springtime pain that hardens them with long forgotten rain. The next time someone rankles you, don't fight. Picture them standing mirrored by a pool, such that the branching of their inborn fire appears as this root self grown upside down, and watch the seasoned bully, cheat, or liar become a child trying not to drown. Thank you.
That was beautiful, David. And I wanted to add also what an honor it was to judge this contest named after Kim Bridgford, who is a very important influence on me and somebody who's supportive and who's inclusive and kind present has made such a difference in my life. Next, I'm going to introduce the winner of this year's Sonnet Crown competition. And this was Susan Delaney Spear for her sonnet crown, The Messenger. The Messenger presents a tightly constructed sequence of scenes from a childhood, rendered with cinematic vividness. Textured details of mixed large and small significance create an air of verisimilitude that we can breathe. There's a dynamic, suspenseful narrative arc that keeps the reader fascinated, such that we forget the poem's length. There are deep themes at play, such as growing awareness of the ephemerality of childhood's magic, the value of trust and belief, the recognition of one's separateness that leads some children to grow up to be poets and artists. And these are just a few of the themes. But these themes, despite their depth, are handled with a light touch, not detracting from the imprint of concentrated, raw emotion that this sonnet crown leaves on us. So I'd like to introduce Susan Delaney Spear reading The Messenger.
It's an honor and a delight to read for you the sonnet crown that I wrote, and I'm still pinching myself to remind myself that it won the sonnet crown contest. I'm especially delighted to be reading for you this year when we are honoring Kim Bridgford. Kim meant so much to all of us and to the whole poetry community, and I admired Kim very much. And one of the things that I admired about Kim was how she always tried to help other poets along in their journey and to help them be their best poet selves. Several years ago at Poetry by the Sea, I attended a sonnet crown panel, and Kim read a beautiful crown about her nephew who became prom king. And after the panel, I asked Kim if she would be willing to share it with me digitally so I could study it. And she said she would, of course, as Kim does. And she said to me, you know, once you begin writing longer poems and sonnet crowns, there's no way back. So this is my first sonnet crown, and I'm thinking about others and especially appreciating Kim today. So here is the sonnet crown that I'd like to read for you. The Messenger. This, she recalls. Mommy piles her, along with friends, into the tan Dodge Dart. The ride, smooth on asphalt, and the dust the car stirs on the lane down to the farm. It is her 5th birthday. Dark purple grapes decorate the trellis. Old Shep's growl scares her slack-kneed, back among adults, circled up in lawn chairs in the shade. Uncle Dale plants his boots on earth. Aunt Emma and Mommy cross their slender legs and swing their sandaled feet. You kids go play. Ripened words and adult conversation rise, diffusing into summer air. Khrushchev, Kennedy, a pregnant mare. Khrushchev, Kennedy, a pregnant mare. Uncle Dale mumbles and adjusts the wad of chew in his left cheek. You kids go play. In pink seersucker shorts and new white Keds, she scrambles down the lane, feeling the gravel through her rubber soles. The old barn pulls her. She turns, yelling and waving. Follow me! The children wait inside until their eyes adjust to dimness. Bales of hay, neatly stacked, pitchforks, shovels, tack, and empty stalls all sharpen into focus. Ah, the ladder to the loft. Don't you dare. They don't. The odors of manure and hay meet tiny noses. The odor wallops them. The smell whomps on. Eyes sting and noses run. The kids sit in the back doorway, stretching matchstick legs and shielding their eyes. Dust motes trot through brilliant fields of light. Outside, horses swill up water from a trough. Then, a messenger appears. He enters the barnyard with intention. All the girls' senses wake. The stir of earth, the rhythm of his hooves, the whinny of his words, the pool of his dark eyes, his heaving flanks, his message, follow me, implicit in the sweep of his tremendous head. One driving turn, one toss of his thick mane, and he thunders back from where he came. The dark horse thunders back from where he came. The slurping horses freeze, their nostrils flare, and they charge off behind. The news ignites her nerves. Come on, we have to tell Aunt Emma. Tell her what? You heard him, didn't you? Her spindly legs propel her to the house while the others string along the lane. Aunt Emma, your horse, it's had a baby. The grown-ups shift in frayed lawn chairs and chuckle. Iced tea glasses sweat and smoke curls upward. Slow down, Jeannie Bug, Aunt Emma says. Say that again. The mare has had her baby. A big horse came to tell us. The details tumble like a waterfall. Words fall and fall. A waterfall of words. Words fall and fail. Pause. Did you see the baby horse? Asks Mommy. No, says Jeannie, but I know. A boy blows bubbles from a tiny wand. One wobbly prism rises, floats, and lands on Uncle Dale's bulging, chew-stuffed cheek. He stands and rumbles. Hey, kids, see what happens to those bubbles when they land on me? The children stare as he pulls out the lump of wet tobacco. They shiver with belief. The grown-ups look away and stifle laughter. The yellow jackets brood among the grapes. Their low buzz underscores the afternoon. Aunt Emma says, it's time for cake and ice cream. Chocolate cake and homemade ice cream seep through paper plates. They eat with plastic spoons. Jeannie unwraps a Barbie doll, a Ken and Stacy too. The girls display the gowns and tiny colored mules across the grass. Jeannie thinks about the messenger, but does not say a word. Once again, Mommy piles the kids into the car. Jeannie feels the dusky summer heat, the melt and stick of skin on vinyl, the rush of words, the ash of mature laughter, the flash of disbelief. At home, she hears the song of self-assured cicadas as she slips between the clean white cotton sheets. She wakes wrapped in a tangled sweat of sheets. The scent of Winston's travels through the house and the red phone in the kitchen jangles. Hello? Mommy says. Oh, really? A coincidence. You found her after we came home? I know. Drowsy summer morning minutes pass. Then Mommy appears. Jeannie, are you awake? I think so. Who was that? Asks Jeannie. Aunt Emma. She says the filly's mighty fine. She's light brown with a white star on her nose. Jeannie shivers. She tosses back the damp bedclothes. The colors of the morning shift. Jeannie senses she's a stranger here. She recalls, words are prone to fail. Thank you.
I'm Barbara Crooker, and I'm coming to you from Fogelsville, Pennsylvania, where there's quite a rainbow outside my window. I think it's Kim blessing us. Lux Perpetua, dear friend. I'd like to thank the board, especially with this contest, for allowing me to choose two winners. It was impossible for me to decide between them. I came to this judging like I come to all judgings with an open mind. But right off the bat, I think I need to confess to you that I too dislike it. Formal poetry, that is. I'm misquoting Marianne Moore here. For many years, I was part of the Westchester Conference on Form and Narrative, having been brought in by Kim Bridgford, and I heard a lot of formal verse. Some of it was engaging, but most of it was perfectly metrical, strictly adherent to form, and also utterly boring. I'm afraid I'm talking about men, but sorry. So I came to this contest with a tiny built-in prejudice against received forms. But at the end of the day, I was blown away by these two brilliant collections of contemporary formal verse. And trust me on this one, neither of them is boring. Jean Dubro's Simple Machines contains not one, but 4 heroic sonic crowns, which is a real tour de force. We've had some examples of other sonnet crowns tonight. The heroic crown is 15 sonnets, all linked together by that mechanism of the last line repeating as the first line of the next sonnet. But then we have the 15th sonnet, which is a master sonnet, and that's made up of all the first lines of the previous sonnets repeated in order. Wow. And these poems aren't just examples of technical virtuosity, but are also engaging on the micro level, the complications of family, modern marriage, and the macro level, historical, political, our divided country. Dubro's use of language is stunning and original throughout. And then there's Julie Kane's Mothers of Ireland, which equally dazzles with technique. It's variety here rather than competence in one form. Her book contains villanelles, which I think is her forte, sestinas, sonnets, ghazals, prose poems, and other forms, while weaving personal narrative, matrilineal family history, neonatal loss, alcoholism, with the history of Ireland, poverty, famine, the repressive church. I couldn't put this book down, riveted by her use of language. What's evident to me in both collections is that they engage the head, craftsmanship, and the heart, subject matter, and are accessible to the general reader, while at the same time containing poems that could be studied and expanded upon by literary critics or graduate students. They exemplify Rina Espaillet's dictum that formal poetry is dancing in a box. Both of these writers are prima ballerinas, Margot Fontaine doing 32 fouettes and making it look easy. All I can do is stand up and cheer. Brava, brava.
Hi, my name is Jeanne Dubrow, and I'm one of this year's co-winners of the Poetry by the Sea Award for a Poetry Collection, along with Julie Kane. And it's my pleasure to read 3 poems from my book, Simple Machines. I'm going to be reading the opening 3 poems from the book's title poem, Simple Machines, which is one of 4 heroic crowns in the collection. Simple Machines. Sometimes we wonder what unfailing means when nothing's warranted to last. Our car breaks down among the clay-red hills, ravines unmarked, nowhere New Mexico. We're far from cities that we know. It takes 3 days to tow our brokenness across the state, driving half speed and braking for delays, the detours up ahead. I navigate, you drive. I tell you I want clean and bright, to trade in clattering and rubberneck for speed or just fidelity. The light is leaking from the sky, our trip a wreck. You say repairing engines is an art, all of these small devices split apart. All of these small devices split apart, they're only brackets, nails, slight things that turn, a pair of arms. You open up the heart of the garage door opener to learn why suddenly it stopped, although the track is slick, the sensors undisturbed. They blink their ruby lights at us. I'm standing back to watch the household surgery. You think about the motor's hurt before you reach inside, your fingers on a wire vein. The door resumes its shutting with a screech, healed for now. There's still a length of chain left out of place, gears clacked to smithereens, these parts unbreakable, these sad machines. These parts unbreakable, these sad machines are what we call our marriages. A friend explains she's trapped. Her subway car careens through stations, hurls around a bend, the tunnel's flickering, and now she wants to seize the bright red handle, yank the brake. If love's a train, then this is her response, to push a button for escape, to take a staircase up and out. But every day she runs inside before the door slides shut. There's chewing gum beneath her seat, a spray of neon scribbles on the glass. So what? She knows the trains have nothing to impart, now grinding to a stop. They will not start. Thank you so much.
Because this event is dedicated to the memory of Kim Bridgford, I especially wanted to pick out a poem that was about a strong woman role model whom I admire a great deal. This poem is about a relative of mine who was the president of her local branch of the Cumann na Báin, the Women's Auxiliary of the Irish Republican Army, during the War of Independence against the British in the early 1920s. This is my double cousin Anna, in memory of Anna Maria Hurley O'Mahony, 1881 to 1972, and it's a loose guzzle. My double cousin Anna O'Mahony was a spy for her country. She was Anna Hurley then, nearly 40, but not yet a bride for her country. She would scout the British troops getting on and off trains at the Bandon Depot. Her farmhouse in Lara stashed ammo and dispatches inside for her country. One time she got raided and stuffed 2 IRA men under her dying father's bed. "My father is dying in there. I pray you search quietly," she not quite lied for her country. Anna's father, Daniel, a Land League man, had named her Anna for Charles Parnell's sister. Anna Parnell, unlike her brother, never compromised for her country. Anna Hurley's brother was a captain in the 3rd West Cork Brigade. Shot in the back by Black and Tans, Frank Hurley died for his country. Was it Anna who planted the plain iron cross by the Bandon River footbridge, silent reminder of a good man crucified for his country? John O'Mahony went on hunger strike in London's Wormwood Scrubs prison. A big man, starved for 16 days, he managed to survive for his country. After the war was over, her father and brother dead, Anna married O'Mahony. He was her link to the time she'd been most alive for her country. To think she was still alive past 90 when I backpacked through Ireland at 20, believing that no one over 30 knew a thing about the fight for a country. Thank you.
Hello. That was fantastic, wasn't it? I just loved that. A magnificent evening. Really enjoyed it. I'd just like to say congratulations again to our wonderful winners, David Southwood for his single sonnet, Susan Delaney Spear for her crown, and of course the co-winners of the 2020 Book Award. You just heard a tiny sampling from them. I hope it's persuaded you to go out and buy the books. Jean Dubrow and Julie Kane, and of course many thanks to Jenna Lay and Barbara Crooker for judging. Now it falls to me to bring this event to an end. The conference too always had its last session, but that usually involved workshop groups meeting on the final Friday afternoon. Typically, Kim would say a few words at the closing reception the night before, standing in the Seaside Lounge at the conference center with that magnificent view of Long Island Sound behind her, when she would raise a glass of surprisingly good wine and to another successful conference. I do not think I'm actually on video. Hang on a sec. What is going on? Oh, you see me. Okay, fine. When she would raise a glass of surprisingly good wine to another successful conference and to everyone who had contributed. In her footsteps, therefore, I would like to raise a virtual glass to you all, both to our many distinguished contributors and also to our equally essential audience watching at home. I remind everyone that it will be available on our YouTube channel if you want to revisit it or if you want to recommend it to anyone who's missed it. Thank you all for coming together with us to celebrate Kim's life, works, and vision. So the advisory board members hope that you've enjoyed the Poetry by the Sea Spring celebration. We are working to bring you a full in-person conference from May the 24th to the 27th, 2022. So please keep those dates in mind as we move ahead. And I'll close with the simple words that were always the last ones printed in the conference program in several languages. Goodbye until next year. Bye.